What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the Nerdy Professor podcast, where we talk about everything black, bold, and beautiful. I am your host, the Nerdy Professor. Sorry if I sound a little bad. I'm a little sick at the moment, but today I want to continue the journey through Black Canadian history. Okay, visualize for a moment fighting a war for your freedom, risking everything for the promise of land and liberty, only to arrive in a foreign land abandoned and betrayed. This was the harsh reality of thousands of Black Loyalists who fought for the British during the American Revolution, hoping to escape the chains of slavery in exchange for their loyalty. Today, we're going to talk about the Black Loyalists and exploring their struggles, their resilience, and their legacies in Canada's history. For now, let's take a look at Vinland Saga, an anime set during a brutal time in history, the Viking Age. The first season follows Thorfinn, raised in a village in Iceland, but he and his family's peaceful life was brought to an end when his father Thors was given an ultimatum by Floki. The ultimatum was join Floki and his men in their fight against the English, or die with your village. So, Thors became a part of the war and set sail with 5 men and Thorfinn, who was a stowaway. When Thors figured out, he was rightfully upset, but he figured this may be some of the last moments that he'll have with his child. Along the way, Thors and his men stop to rest and resupply at some nearby islands, but they are jumped by Askeladd, the leader of a mercenary band of Vikings. Thors beats the brakes off of Askeladd's men without killing them, I might add. He then challenges Askeladd to a duel, beats him, but Thors surrenders in order to save Thorfinn and the other villagers. Thors is then shot down by a volley of arrows, and Thorfinn becomes consumed by revenge after his father is brutally killed right in front of his eyes. And this is all in the first 4 episodes. Throughout season 1, Thorfinn challenges Askeladd to 3 duels, and each time the boy gets embarrassed, especially the last one. At the outset, Thorfinn believes that vengeance will bring him peace. He thinks that by killing Askeladd, he will reclaim his honor and purpose and finally escape the pain and anger that have defined his life. As the story unfolds, Thorfinn begins to realize that true freedom is not won through revenge or the destruction of an enemy. It's not simply about defeating a physical oppressor, but about confronting the internal battles that shape one's identity. His journey reveals that freedom comes not from an external act, but from a deeper understanding of oneself. Thorfinn finds that he is trapped in a cycle of rage and violence, a cycle that has defined him, not as a person seeking peace, but as one consumed by hatred and revenge. His quest becomes not just a fight for freedom from external enemies, but a journey to peace within himself. He must ask, who am I beyond the sword? What does it mean to truly be free? This internal struggle for freedom and identity is mirrored in the experience of Black Loyalists. During the American Revolution, thousands of enslaved Black people fought for the British, risking everything for the promise of freedom. The British offered land, liberty, and a chance to build a new life in exchange for their service. But when the war ended, the Black Loyalists found that the freedom they had been promised was elusive. They arrived in Canada only to discover barren land, a hostile reception from the local white population, and a harsh new reality far from the fertile plots they had been promised. Much like Thorfinn, the Black Loyalists had to grapple with the question of what freedom truly meant. Was it just the absence of slavery, or did it also include the right to build lives, families, and communities with dignity? Was it the ability to live as equals, to have a voice, to participate in society without being condemned to a life of racial prejudice? These were the questions that shaped their struggle, much like the internal battle Thorfinn faces in his journey. Alright, let's go to the 18th century. The American Revolution, a time of immense upheaval and change, was not just a battle between colonies and a monarchy. Among the soldiers fighting for the British were thousands of Black men and women, many of whom were enslaved or born free, but all seeking the promise of a better life. The British Crown offered them freedom in exchange for loyalty during the Revolution, a prospect that sounded like salvation to many who endured the horrors of slavery. However, the promise was not as clear-cut as it appeared. Upon the war's conclusion in 1783, thousands of Black Loyalists, men and women who risked everything in the pursuit of freedom, were promised land and new opportunities in Nova Scotia, Canada. Yet when they arrived, they found barren land, inadequate resources, and unwelcoming hostility from the white settlers already in the region. The land that they had been promised was far from fertile, and the reception they received was colder than Alberta in January. For the Americans listening, that's 23 degrees to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. This harsh reality of the Black Loyalist journey reflects broader themes of betrayal and survival, themes that can be explored in parallel with the experience of other groups historically, including characters in Vinland Saga. Just as Thorfinn's journey is marred by broken promises and disillusionment, the Black Loyalists quickly learned that their fight for freedom was only the beginning of a much longer struggle for survival, dignity, and identity. So there's a picture of a black man in a colonial military uniform with one hand raised and his other holding a rifle. The man in that picture is Richard Pierpoint. Pierpoint was a loyalist, a soldier, and a griot. A Senegalese man who was sold into slavery in 1760. Pierpoint joined Butler's Rangers during the Revolution, earning his freedom by fighting for the British. After being honorably discharged from Butler's Rangers, he settled in the Niagara region and received 200 acres of land. He was one of the many Black Loyalists struggling for survival in the wilderness of Canada. Yet, despite these hardships, Pierpoint became an advocate for Black rights, petitioning for land grants and striving to secure a better future for his people. In 1794, he co-signed a petition demanding plots of land that were separate from those of white people and that Black people be placed next to each other so they could help each other clear land. In his resilience, Pierpoint's story embodies the very essence of Black Loyalist struggle. From fighting for freedom to fighting for a place to call home in a world that rejected him. For the Black Loyalist, freedom was not a simple act of escape. It was the start of a deeper, more personal struggle. They were free from slavery, yes, but they were still bound by the chains of systemic racism, poverty, and exclusion. Their battle was not just about survival, but about the right to define themselves in a world that continually sought to define them by their pasts. Just as Thorfinn's identity was tied to his need for revenge, the Black Loyalist identities were shaped by the promise of a freedom that never truly materialized. Consider Rose Fortune, one of the first Black women to gain a reputation as a businesswoman in Canada. Born around 1774 in what would become the United States, she and her family earned their freedom by supporting the British during the American Revolution. After the war, they were among the more than 3,000 Black Loyalists who were resettled in Nova Scotia. Rose settled in Annapolis Royal, where despite the barriers and prejudices of the time, she became a respected and prominent member in her community. Fortune was known for her baggage carting business along the waterfront. She also acted as an unofficial police officer, ensuring peace and order long before there was any type of formal law enforcement system. Her resilience in the face of adversity and her ability to carve out a place for herself in the harsh realities of post-revolutionary Nova Scotia made her a symbol of endurance. She worked for over 20 years helping travelers, military officers, and officials, all of whom took note of her strength and character. Her journey mirrored the ongoing struggle of Black Loyalists. Survival was not enough. They sought to rebuild their identities just as Rose did, in a world that wanted to deny them that right. The question they faced was similar to Thorfinn's. Who are we in this new world? In a land that doesn't welcome us, how could they fully embrace their identity when society continued to reject them? Their fight for freedom, like Thorfinn's, was not just against external oppression. It was about reshaping who they were and what they stood for. The Black Loyalists had to reject the labels imposed upon them and carve out their own space in a world that sought to limit their existence to survival alone. In both Vinland Saga and in the stories of the Black Loyalists, we see that freedom isn't just about external victory. It's about redefining your place in the world. It's about confronting the emotional and spiritual scars that come with betrayal, displacement, and the weight of broken promises. Thorfinn's journey is about reconciling his identity, breaking free from the rage and grief that defined him. Similarly, the Black Loyalist fight was about survival and adaptation, not just to land, but to a new identity, one that embraced their dignity, humanity, and right to live authentically, despite the forces that sought to oppress them. In Vinland Saga, characters like Thorfinn and Askeladd grapple with loyalty and identity in a world that constantly tests their values. Thorfinn learns that true loyalty is not blind allegiance to leaders or causes, but about understanding what freedom really means and where it comes from. In the same vein, Black Loyalists, after pledging loyalty to the British Crown, were left to question where their loyalty truly lay when their promises of freedom were abandoned. The sense of betrayal they experienced forced them into a liminal space where they had to redefine their allegiance, not just to a foreign power, but to themselves and their own fight for dignity. This is where figures like Thomas Peters comes in. Thomas Peters, a West African man representing the unyielding struggle of Black Loyalists for freedom, land, and justice. Born around 1738 in what is now Nigeria, Peters was captured during the transatlantic slave trade and enslaved in Louisiana and then North Carolina. After escaping in 1776, he joined the Black Pioneers and fought as a sergeant for the British during the American Revolution. Following the war, Peters and his family were among the Black Loyalists evacuated to Nova Scotia, where they faced unfulfilled promises, land, and provisions from the British. Frustrated by the lack of support, Peters became a leading spokesperson for the Black Loyalists, organizing petitions to demand land and resources that had been promised. When conditions didn't improve, he played a key role in the mass migration of Black Loyalists to Sierra Leone in 1792. Peters recruited a third of the 1,196 Black Loyalists who left Nova Scotia for West Africa, hoping to establish the settlement of Freetown. There, he continued to fight for the rights of Black settlers until his death later that year. Peters' life underscores the relentless pursuit of justice and self-determination by Black Loyalists. His advocacy for land, liberty, and self-rule helped shape the early history of the Freetown settlement, where he is remembered as a central figure in the founding of the colony. Both Vinland Saga and the stories of the Black Loyalists remind us that freedom is not just a destination. It's a continual, evolving process. Thorfinn's journey is one of self-discovery, evolving from vengeance to peace. And through that evolution, he finds the true meaning of freedom. Similarly, the Black Loyalist journey was one of survival, struggle, and resilience. Not just for land, but for the right to live as free, equal human beings in a world that continuously sought to oppress them. The contrast between the hope and despair felt by Black Loyalists echoes Thorfinn's journey in Vinland Saga. The emotional and psychological toll of broken promises, the internal battle to define one's identity beyond the exceptions placed upon them, is something that resonates deeply with both stories. These figures, whether in the context of Vinland Saga or the Black Loyalist narrative, represents the complexities of freedom, loyalty, and identity. The struggles are not confined to the past. They are enduring legacies that continue to shape the discussion of race, freedom, and identity today. The experiences of Black Loyalists are not just a chapter from history. They continue to resonate in our world today. As we take a look at their legacy, we find echoes of their struggle in the modern fight for racial justice, equality, and identity. Take the Black Lives Matter movement, for example. Much like the Black Loyalists, Black people today are still fighting for equality and dignity in societies that often fail to uphold those promises. The resistance to oppressive systems that Black Loyalists embodied is mirrored in the ongoing struggle against police brutality, systemic racism, and inequality. Okay, so some key takeaways. During the American Revolution, thousands of Black men and women fought for the British in exchange for promises of freedom. Yet, after the war, these promises quickly turned hollow. Upon arriving in Nova Scotia, they were met with barren land, inadequate resources, and hostility from white settlers. Second, the story of the Black Loyalists continues to resonate today as a symbol of resilience and the ongoing fight for justice, equality, and identity. While the British Crown's promises of freedom and land were largely unmet, the Black Loyalist perseverance in the face of adversity helped to lay the groundwork for future generations of Black Canadians. In the end, their story serves as a reminder that freedom is not just about the absence of oppression, but about the ability to live authentically, to reclaim one's identity, and to find a place of belonging in the world. And lastly, the struggles of Black Loyalists can be seen as part of the broader struggle for racial justice that continues to this day. With the Black Lives Matter movement and their fight against systemic racism and police brutality, the story of the Black Loyalist echoes in today's world as marginalized groups continue to challenge systems of oppression and fight for equality and dignity. Alright y'all, that's it. Thank you for joining. I hope you learned something. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to drop a like and consider following the podcast for more of your favorite Black history anime infused content. Until next time, peace.